Welcome to the Loving People Podcast, a ministry of First Southern Baptist Church. We're your hosts, Patrick
and Rada,
and our goal is to point you to Jesus in all struggles of this life. We made it.
We did.
Now, what you may not know, unless we decide to put this in the actual podcast side of things, is we just tried to do that 3-4 times.
It wasn't pretty.
It could be worse. It could be worse. When we first started the podcast, we had the opening script in front of us, and I just read it. And for the last 2 or 3 episodes, I've just done it by memory. And this time, I could not remember it for the life of me. It was ugly. Yes. All right, Rada. So we, last episode, really introduced season 2, and we're going to be looking in at what this season?
Dysfunctional families.
Dysfunctional family. I know listeners may have all kinds of emotions going on as they hear those words, because really, if we're being honest, there's no truly fully functioning family. And that's all because of sin that we've got in our own lives and in the midst of our families. And I could tell you story upon story of our family, even though we've only got a 6 and a 3 or 7 now. Wow. A 7 and a 3-year-old in the house. And oh my goodness, the times they look at us and we ask them to do something and they just, you can tell. It doesn't get
any better.
And oh boy. Oh boy, we're in the full foot stomping phase of our 3-year-old right now. So we've got our own dysfunctions, I guess you could say. Man, so in the dysfunctional family, one of those things is marriage that we're going to be looking in at this episode and next episode. And I know we've talked about this in the past, but the marriage culture has really turned more into a wedding culture. It's turned into an industry. The amount of money that's made on the wedding industry is crazy in and of itself.
An event.
It is. And so when we walk through, if I'm going to be doing a wedding for somebody, we require them to do some premarital counseling. And one of the things that we discuss is, hey, be careful how much time, how much effort, literally even how much money you're willing to put into the wedding event versus investing in your marriage. So a lot of people, they're willing to fork over, what's the average, $30,000 now for a wedding, an event for a day. But they're not willing to put any time, money, effort, or anything when it comes to let's invest in the actual marriage. And yet divorces are on the rise. Weddings, even in themselves, are getting shorter and shorter. Let's get through this ceremony so that way we can get to the party afterwards at the venue that we're at. And it's just interesting where we're at in this whole, not just marriage culture, but wedding culture.
Yeah. Well, I think we talked a little earlier, too, about the fact that so much of the time in our society today, everything's disposable, including marriage.
Yeah.
And, you know, if this one doesn't work out, that's okay. I can meet somebody else and marry again and again and again. And that's not at all what God created had in mind when he created us and when he first set this into motion back in Genesis 2. He didn't intend for it to be disposable.
That's right. And so with that being said, let's kind of take a shift. Next week is going to be really talking about, marital problems, marital difficulties. What do we do then? Before we get to that, we want to give you guys basically, what are the pillars to the house of a good marriage? What keeps the house from falling in? And so we want to show y'all from Scripture, not just our opinions, what a good marriage should look like. What do you need to have a good marriage? What was God's design for marriage is probably the best way of saying that. And you gave us a great intro. I mean, it doesn't take long of reading the Bible. You turn one page and you're already at, boom, here's part of God's design for marriage in Genesis 2, right?
Yeah. In verses 22 and 20, let's try that again. In verses 23 and 20 through 24, we see that God didn't want man to be alone. He created woman so the two could be one together under his lordship, under his umbrella. Eve was created as a helper, and I even read where it was a helper in this instance was described as someone to surround, protect, and aid.
I can't remember. There's a lot of meaning packed into the Hebrew word that they use for helper there. And I can't remember the name of the word, but when you really break that word down and see what all it's used for across contexts in Hebrew, oh man, you see kind of the full role of what a wife is meant to be for a husband and vice versa a little bit there. Yeah. Wow. And you've got a little bit more here. That's kind of the wife was given as a helper for her husband, but you also have some stuff here. What about the husband for the wife?
Well, I always tell people in counseling when a couple comes in and they want to talk about their marriage, I always tell them that the husbands are to love the wives as Christ loved the church. And I can tell you, if my husband is loving me like Christ loves the church, I have no problem submitting to his authority.
Oh, that's a good word.
You know, he's not being a dictator. He's not running over me. If he is treating me with that kind of love, like Jesus loves the church, there's not any problem with women submitting. And I'm not a feminist by any means, but at the same time, I'm not a doormat.
Right.
And I think that God did not give me the personality he gave me to have someone run over me. And in that, though, I believe that I have a duty to submit to what my husband's leadership is, as long as he's following God in the direction our family goes.
Yeah. Yeah. When the Bible talks about what a husband is meant to be and the wife submitting to the husband, it never has in mind an abusive husband, whether that's emotionally or physically speaking. It never has in mind a husband that is not submitting to Jesus and
That's right.
and leading his wife as Jesus would lead the church, dying for the church.
When a believing husband and wife institute God's principles of marriage, a solid, healthy marriage results. Keep Christ as the head of the man and the wife together.
That's right.
So I think that paints a really nice picture. Also in counseling, a lot of times I'll give the pyramid that God is the head of, and husband and wife come next. Yeah. And I am to have him above my children, above my career, above my obligations. Mm-hmm. All that has its place. But he's supposed to come second. Sometimes he does. Sometimes I fail in that. But, it's something that we're to strive for. And I also use that in that pyramid with God being on the top, if I put myself on the very bottom of it, mm-hmm. I'm just above where Jesus was when he came to earth as a servant. And that is such a good reminder to really keep us in our place in where God created us and what he created us for and the price that he paid. It just helps to keep it all in order. And that's something that I open up my cabinet every once in a while and we'll look at that pyramid, because in today's society, that's not what we're taught.
Yeah. Oh, good word. So you've got here kind of continuing the theme of submission and service. You talk about the Christian idea of marriage being one of not just submission that's one-sided, but it's mutual. Can you talk to that a little bit there?
Well, and I think that just in any healthy relationship, if it is going to be God-centered, both people have a responsibility to keep their relationship with the Lord first and foremost. In that, there is a mutual submission to each other as well as a service. I am to serve Kenny. He is to serve me. And, after 45 years of marriage, we are still not great at it. But we're working on it. And the fact that we have both worked toward that is what's kept us together for that long. I'm sure there were times he wanted to just murder me. And I even tell the story about the time shortly after he had his knee surgery that I was sitting up in the bed looking at him in the middle of the night. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Thinking about putting a pillow over your head." And we've laughed about that. But there are times that happens. But at the same time, if I am where I need to be with my relationship with the Lord, it's a whole lot easier to love Kenny.
Yeah.
It's a whole lot easier to submit to what he desires, what he wants. And it's an act of service then. So I think keeping the Lord first is always the best part.
Back to the pyramid, right?
Back to the pyramid.
Back to the pyramid. It's interesting, in Ephesians 5, where it talks about, it says, wives, submit to your husbands. It doesn't necessarily say husbands, submit to your wives, but in that verse where it says, as you mentioned before, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, there's a sense of you giving up yourself in doing that.
Yes.
And that's you saying, hey, I'm submitting to the Lord first and foremost, and I am loving my wife well. And that's something that I don't think I fully understood that when I first entered into the marriage covenant.
I don't think that I did either. Also, a part of this too is, we hear all the time about, well, you have rights. Mm-hmm. In a marriage, you really don't.
Yeah.
You give that up in the submission, in the service to each other. But if we're loving like Christ loves the church, we have not lost one thing. We have gained.
And isn't that wonderful, that picture? But I think the world can miss that. We talk about the idea of a good marriage, and we talk about in the idea of a good marriage, oh, we went on this wonderful trip together. We made these memories together. But there's a difference in just a good marriage and a godly marriage. Mm-hmm. And the question is God the central focal point of your marriage? The triangle again.
That's right. I'm telling you, I firmly believe in that. And you can have fun on trips and you can enjoy time together. But when the rubber meets the road is when everybody has work schedules and kids have ball schedules and you're running here and there and you've got obligations and you're under stress and somebody's got a runny nose and doesn't feel good and is got their feelings on their shoulders, and it gets ugly. It gets messy. And it's at that time we have to really see what kind of marriage we have.
That's right.
And how strong it is. And I guess that's a good point for me to kind of plug this book. I have a book by Mack, Strengthening Your Marriage. And it's something, it has worksheets in it. And it is, here we go.
This is the book bell. Here we go.
Book bell. Okay. Well, this is the book bell, but it has worksheets in it for you to work together. And I highly recommend this. Even if your marriage is good, there's always room to grow. And on the back it says for better or for worse. And I can tell you in the 45 years Kenny and I have been married, there have been good times. Mm-hmm. There have also been some rocky ones that we didn't know if we would survive and on our own couldn't. But only with the strength of the Lord coming through and reminding us of who we are created in Him.
That's right. Yeah. And when we get our eyes off of that, we take our eyes off of Jesus, as Hebrews says, that's when things tend to go sideways. I like how one guy, Paul Tripp, he's like a guru when it comes to this kind of stuff. He said that forgiveness, and if we think of this in the sense of marriage, is where he's talking about it. Forgiveness is a vertical commitment that is followed by a horizontal transaction. So he's
vertical,
yes,
up
vertical,
and down.
Vertical commitment. So basically what he's saying in his fancy words, let's translate that. Okay, until we get our relationship with God right, we can't get our relationship with anybody else right.
That's right.
And if we're thinking horizontally, like out there with other human beings, whether that's a spouse, kind of the context we're talking about, whether that's our children, whether that's kids, your parents, or friends or family, if we have a barrier between us and God, if we've got something going on there, then everything that you're trying to fix out there is going to be messed up. Yeah.
Well, and we're going back to the pyramid again, because if God's not first in that, the rest of it's not going to line up. And so much of the time when, especially in talking with young women and their situations with their husbands, we find that, they may say, okay, God's first, but the kids are second and the job is third. Mm-hmm. And the husband comes way down the list, and that's not what it was intended to be.
That's right. Yeah, and that's when things tend to go sideways, or already have gone sideways. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here we've got godly marriage. A godly marriage today can be characterized by a few things. We've got deep commitment, mutual respect. What are some other things we have here?
Open communication, sacrificial love, putting what is best for that other person first. Prioritizing spiritual growth together.
Together, not separately, but together.
Actively serving one another. Forgiveness. A commitment to faithfulness. All while navigating modern life challenges with a focus on honoring God and bringing Him the glory.
Yeah. That's big. So here you've got listed a few key aspects of a godly marriage, and maybe a few of these we could say are absolute pillars, things that you would absolutely need. And if you don't have these in your marriage, it is as if you've got some extra weight of your marriage leaning on some of these other things that they weren't meant to bear. This load was meant to be balanced out as if it were a well-structured building, a well-structured home, to where every beam is equally sharing the load.
Yeah.
That's how we could view some of these things here. So number one, you've got spiritual unity. So this isn't just unity in any sense, in a spiritual sense. Can you speak to that a little bit?
If you have someone that is a brand new Christian that is planning to marry someone who is very mature in their Christianity, that very mature Christian thinks, oh, I can bring them up. But so often what happens is there is a lessening. That person is pulled back, not intentionally,
Right.
but just because that person who is weaker tends to not see the importance of it. And you just cannot stress this enough. It's just that important. Both partners have to be unified on what their marriage is going to be, how they're going to raise their children, how they're going to spend their money, if they're going to tithe. They've got to be on the same page, or there's going to be problems.
Right. Yeah. I think we see that a lot. And we can say, for those that might be listening to this, and maybe you're just in the dating side of things, if you're a Christian, do not date somebody who's not a Christian. I've heard it called missionary dating, but my favorite phrase is they call it flirt to convert.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a no-go, bad idea, will end badly. But if you're already locked in there, and maybe you're at this different level, you're right. That's a hard place to be.
In my life group class, I tell those ladies almost every week, if I could get you to see what I have already learned, and you get it at this age, your life will be very different. And whether it's in relationships, or your relationship with the Father, or with how you treat your kids, how you respond to them, there is so much that I wish I could take that part of my brain and transport it into theirs and help them to see it earlier, because it really makes a difference.
Yeah, big time difference. And I think part of that is we also have to remember growth is a process. That can be easy to forget. We think maybe if the person is on the higher end of the spectrum and they're looking at the person on the other end, they're like, why can't you just kind of get on this level and get there quickly? And I think of 2 years ago, I started running, and I had a goal in a race where I wanted to be that, like, finish in a certain time. And I was nowhere near that time. And here I am about 2 years later, and I'm just now getting close to that time. It's taken 2 years to build the stamina and all that. And so growth, even in the spiritual life in a similar way, that's a process. You can't microwave it. It's more like a crock pot. And
that's right.
And if you want it to be done right and you want it to be lasting and done well, allow it to take its time. That's okay.
That's right. And, some of the ways that you can do this is by praying regularly together, attending church together, studying scripture together. Incorporate your faith into your daily life decisions. Kitty and I have been talking about some changes in our life, and we've just been praying, Lord, your will, not ours. And ours can get in the way and cause us disappointment. And that's not what we need. That's not what's best for us. So we have to be willing to step back and say, Father, it's your will, not ours.
And that could be hard. Commitment to fidelity. Fidelity. That's not a word we use very often.
Not unless you're talking about insurance.
That's right. That's right. So what do we mean by that? Commitment to fidelity.
Maintaining a monogamous relationship, viewing sexual intimacy as a sacred act within a marriage.
Okay.
You want me to say that louder for the folks in the back?
I was going to say, I think I need a lawyer to break some of this down for me. So monogamous by that.
One man, one woman.
Okay, so that's a big, scary word. I remember the first time I read that, I had to Google it. Did not know what that meant. A monogamous relationship and viewing sexual intimacy as a sacred act within marriage. There's a lot to that statement.
There's a lot to that. And in today's society, sexual freedom since the 60s has become a big deal, and we have lost that sacredness, that bond that only a husband and wife are to share.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks volumes on where we are in marriages, where we are in families, what our society is choosing as right and wrong. I think it all stems back to this. God intended for one man and one woman to become one flesh under him.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just a sacred act just on its own. It's within the bounds of marriage. And limits, our culture views limits as some demeaning, devaluing, you're taking away my freedom. But there was one great apologist, he made this great point where he said, there's a difference in freedom from and freedom for. He said, we think of freedom in America, 1776, we gained freedom from our oppressors. We think of, rightly so, when slavery was finally abolished, there was a freedom from the oppressor. Yet in all that, America, we think of freedom from things. We don't think of freedom for in the sense of, here was my design. A fish, when he all of a sudden gets in his mind, I'm done with this water. I want to go live my life. I want to go walk on the land. I want to wear a suit. I want to go work on Wall Street. I want to do all those things. He doesn't know in that moment. He's being free from the water. He's also signed his death warrant.
That's right.
And so here we are thinking, I just want to be free from these things.
And think about when today's Columbus Day that we're recording this.
Yes.
Think about when Columbus came over. They wanted a freedom to worship. Mm-hmm. They had ideas of what they wanted. They weren't necessarily running from, but they wanted to establish a society where the freedom could be. It's the same way with Scripture. Mm-hmm. The more we follow God's plan for creation and for living our lives, the more freedom we have. And that is completely contrary to what our culture teaches us.
Yes. Yeah. So if we think of freedom for, that fish is only so free as long as he's in the water. Mm-hmm. And so God, in the same way, gave us a design, and we are free when we're living within that design.
We are.
Yeah. So it's not so much just a freedom from, also a freedom for. Unconditional love. This ain't conditional love. Once you meet these standards, once you do these things, then I will love you. Unconditional. How is that set apart?
Putting the needs of your spouse first and foremost.
You can say that one louder for those in the back.
I can say that one louder for the ones in the back. Actively seeking to understand and to support them through challenges. It's not easy. It's not easy to do that.
And if it is, we're probably not loving unconditionally,
That's
right?
That's right. When you put the other person in front of your own well-being, and there's no drawing it back. I know I hear a lot of times people say, well, they really didn't understand unconditional love growing up. So many children today grow up in a society that they have to abide by these set of standards. And I'm not talking about rules, you have to be home at this time, this kind of stuff. I'm talking about they don't understand a parental love just because they're our kids. And that's sad. And I think spouses get into that. We get to thinking our job's more important, our time with our kids are more important. What I want is more important than what we decide as a family.
Yeah. I think this is something that if I could go back to my first 3 or 4 years of marriage, I would have shaken myself and said, understand this point. And I still want to shake myself at times and say, understand this. Because it's so easy to see from our eyes the things that are going on, but it's so easy to see things from the other spouse's point of view. And oh man, I see now, we've been in this busy season of life, but my wife started teaching again and all that. We get home, everybody's tired, and I get these moments where I see, wow, you're exhausted. And finally it hits me. What can I do to help out? What can I do to take the burden off of you right now where you can sit down for a little bit? And that is not natural to me.
No, and it's not. Even if it is, hey, let's divide and conquer. Let me take the kids and get them ready for bed while you're finishing up here.
Yeah.
That divide and conquer mentality is essential when your kids are little because they can take over the world.
Oh, goodness, can they? And they want to.
They do.
They do. So another one I think that we can miss in marriages is open communication. Yeah. And God wants, I think we can clearly say that, God wants every marriage to have open, clear, and good communication. And that can mean so many different things, but help us understand that a little bit.
Well, I think mainly you have to be able to express your feelings, your thoughts, your ideas freely, without judgment, without a fear of retribution. There you go. Hello. I knew what it was in my head. You've got to actively listen. You've got to, and that's not easy either, because a lot of times when things are going on around you, you're thinking, okay, let's get to the point of this.
You can think of, I'm sure Kenny has never been watching a football game while you're trying to talk to him, right?
No, or even on his phone. He gives me his undivided attention. And all of you who believe that, I've got some land to sell you. So, but, you've got to be active in it. You've got to make an effort toward it. It's a sign of respect. And also it helps you to resolve any conflicts you have if you can speak openly. I even told one person that came in not too long ago, I said, sometimes I think that we need to just have a moment where you can say, okay, it's time for the naked truth here. Mm-hmm. Where you can say whatever is on your mind, regardless of whether it's controversial, whether it's what the other person thinks. You have to be able to say that.
Yeah. We do that sometimes. I remember we were walking on the beach on vacation this summer, and Maddie was like, can we have naked truth question time? And I was like, what? Where we just ask each other questions and just talk. She's like, we haven't done this kind of thing in a long time, in years. And so it was just a fun few minutes of just walking down the beach and talking.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that there are times that maybe you don't speak your mind, or you're afraid you'll offend the other one because they're so dogmatic about it. And not that I would know anything about anybody being dogmatic about anything, but it's just one of those things that you have to have the ability to say, I don't agree with that, or I don't see that in the same light you see it, and be able to explain and not be mad, not be judgmental, just to have the freedom to express my thoughts.
Yeah. And actually be heard.
Mm-hmm.
We're not listening. What do they say? You're not listening to respond. You're listening to listen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's good. Open communication. That's probably one of the most common things in marriages that struggles. Another big one is mutual respect. Now, RESPECT, we all want it, but are we giving it? I think that's the real question here.
I think so too. And a lot of times we believe our opinions are the most important. They're the best. It's, in my opinion, you need to, whatever. And that's not what respect is.
Yeah.
Honoring, valuing the other person's opinion, their feelings, their strengths, their contributions, and then being courteous, being kind.
Being generous with our words with one another. Yeah. Hey, maybe the reason that the laundry or the dishes didn't get done is because something was going on in our spouse's life. But we, maybe didn't listen to know what was going on, or we didn't have the mutual respect to know what was going on.
Well, and in the mutual respect, so many times, especially in older generations, the woman's work is in the house. Well, when the woman went outside the house to work, that shifted.
Yes, it did.
And it has to be, it's not a 50-50 thing, it's a 100-100 thing. And we have to remember that, and we have to look out for the other one.
Yep. That can change. It's paradigm shifting for a lot of marriages, I'm sure. Forgiveness and reconciliation. Man.
Be willing to apologize when you mess up.
Yeah. Be willing to apologize, admit your faults, and on the other end, be willing to forgive.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean you don't have a right to be frustrated. You don't have a right to be angry in the moment. Okay. The goal is to work towards healing, as you said here, right? Now, I think where a lot of marriages can mess up here, and we actually talked with one couple in premarital counseling about this, is said, hey, you got to be careful down the road when one does mess up. You can't hold that over their head for years down the road. And that's such a human and easy and natural thing to do. Well, do you remember that one thing you did so many years ago? We didn't forgive if we're truly holding that over their head.
That's right. You know, we have to think too, we study all the time that in the New Testament it says that we are to love because He loved us first.
Yes.
It's the same in forgiveness. When someone does something, and we talked about this yesterday in Life Group, when someone does something that hurts you, you're to respond as I have done worse. And I ask the Lord to forgive me. So how in the world can I withhold forgiveness from you when I expect Him to forgive me?
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I would say this is one of the biggest ones that we can probably say. That's not just a little pillar. That's one of the big pillars.
That's right.
Big one that holds up a lot of the house. All right. So forgiveness and reconciliation. Huge, huge, huge. Shared goals and values. So basically we could say staying on the same page, but you've got another way of saying it here.
Aligning on important life decisions, parenting philosophies, and spiritual priorities. If my parenting style is different than Kenny's parenting style, our kids are confused.
Yeah.
And we have to come together on what's going to be acceptable and what hill we're going to die on.
Yeah.
And that was something that we would always ask each other, is this really a hill you want to die on? When we were talking about our parental responsibilities. It's the same with spiritual priorities. If one person is a giver and the other one is not so much, your tithe check is going to be an issue.
Yeah.
You have to have the same priorities, and you have to be willing to share those goals and values.
Yeah. And that goes across so many things. Parenting, finances, goals in life, maybe whether or not you take a trip that you should or shouldn't take. So many things there. Serving one another, that's a big one. You say actively seeking ways to support and uplift your spouse through everyday acts of service. That's great. Do you want to add anything there?
And I think it speaks for itself.
Yeah.
If I'm going to get up and I'm going to go to the refrigerator and I'm going to get me a Diet Coke, the very least I can do is say, would you like something to drink while I'm in here?
Yeah.
Now that sounds so simple, but how many times do we just get up and we go take care of our needs and we don't think about the spouses?
Got that right.
I mean, that's an easy way, and it gives value. It gives that sense of I'm seeking to serve you.
Yeah. And when you add stairs into the equation,
Yes.
and you got to go upstairs to the
Yes.
kitchen, that adds even more to
It
it.
does. It adds value.
For the
That's
last
right.
year, we've had stairs in our house. So anytime somebody goes up and says, man, I'm going to go get a water, I'm going to go get a snack, you can see the other person perk up.
Yeah.
Will you get me this?
That's right. But it should be automatic.
Yeah.
We should say, what can I get for you?
It should. It should. And it isn't always. It isn't.
It's not.
And shame on us.
Yes.
And the last one, and this can be hard depending on seasons of life, intentional quality time. I'll say that one again. Intentional quality time. Tell us about that one.
I think especially when the family's young, regular date nights are important. As the family gets older, you have a lot of time together anyway. And I think that's when meaningful conversations come in. I don't care about the weather. I don't care about if they've got the highway resurfaced. There's a lot of things I don't care about. But to have a meaningful conversation, let me tell you about this person I met today and how what they said made me stop and think.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That kind of stuff is what I want to hear about. What I want to really, I want Kenny to say to me, not just how was your day and keep walking. You seem a little stressed out. What's going on?
Yeah.
Care about me. Care about what's happened to put me in this frame of mind. That's what is most important, I think, at this stage of life, and it rolls over into the physical intimacy then.
Yeah.
If you are truly loving, it's going to come through, and it's going to lead to what you desire then.
Yeah. Yeah. Intentional quality time. Every word of that definition there is important. And so a few examples of what this might look like. One could be the couple who actively prays together before making important decisions. I think that's huge. A husband who prioritizes his wife's emotional needs and actively listens to her concerns. And maybe some of the female listeners right now are thinking, oh, come on.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we as women need. It's not just a want. We need that.
Yeah.
A wife who encourages her husband's spiritual growth and celebrates his accomplishments. Guys have an ego. They were created with one. And it is part of our responsibility to keep that built up in the godly ways.
Right.
In ways, Kenny right now is going through a discipleship class, and he's teaching a class, and he's working full time. And it's been a struggle at times to do all of the reading assignments. So I try to encourage him, when this is done, just think how good it's going to be to have it all behind you, and give him the quiet time that he needs to do this.
Yes, that's huge. A couple who openly discusses their struggles and works together, not separately, to find solutions. The couple who actively serves their community together, reflecting their faith through their actions. Wow. What about even a family who does that? That's really cool.
Well, Russ was talking about the work day we had this weekend and how many people showed up and how many times do couples do that. I know Dean and Monica were out in the heat working outside. They came and they served together as a couple. That's very important.
Huge. Absolutely huge. You got one more here.
A couple who makes a conscious effort to prioritize their relationship despite busy schedules. That goes back to just putting the other person first, putting their needs before yours.
Yeah. Paul Tripp, back to him, he had this other really good quote. A good marriage is a good marriage because people in that marriage say no. And he goes on to clarify, they don't say no to one another, they say no to themselves. Yeah. And so kind of like you were saying, I'm going to say no to my desire to go to the Razorback game with my buddies this Saturday because I need time with my wife. I'm going to say no to my opportunity to, go fishing this Friday and take this day of vacation when I'm saving that day of vacation for a day with my wife. So many different things there. But we have to constantly say no to the self and the selfish desires of self. Right. And then we're beginning to build a good marriage.
That's right.
No to self, yes to spouse.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I've got one thing I want to share. There's a book bell. Ding,
book
ding.
Bell.
So it's called, it's by Paul Tripp, but it's called Marriage, and it's based on 6 gospel commitments that every couple not only should make, but needs to make. And I've got the table of contents here, and I think the table of contents in and of itself is even worth the price tag of the book. Now, you can get this anywhere. You can get it on Kindle, you can get it on Amazon, you can go to Walmart.com, wherever you want to go. And I would highly encourage every person who is in a marriage to get this book. I just started reading it myself. But all of these principles are based on the Bible. They will improve communication. They will improve trust. They will improve you keeping God at the top of the triangle, right? Mm-hmm. So many things. And he's just got a lot of wisdom packed in here because he has been a seminary professor, a pastor, and a biblical counselor for the duration of his career for decades. And he's a wealth of wisdom and a wealth of knowledge. That's and right. This resource could highly strengthen your marriage. Yep. We'll link to that in the show notes. 3 more that I would mention. There's another one that my wife and I read through a couple years ago by a guy named Tim Keller. It's just The Meaning of Marriage is the name of the book. And oh my goodness, absolutely fantastic. He covers so many different things. And then another one, these 2 are kind of your really easy reads, the short ones. One is called The Mingling of Souls by Mack Chandler, where he gives basically, it's a walkthrough of the Song of Solomon, but he also tells about his story of marriage, how his marriage was a complete wreck when they first started out. And it took him actually taking the principles in the Word of God in the Bible and employing them in his life. And it was only then that his marriage began to kind of iron out. And so, like we mentioned earlier, couldn't get his relationship with others around him right, with his spouse, until he got his relationship with God right.
Yeah, that's right.
And then lastly, kind of co-authored by Francis Chan and his wife. There's a book that I just went blank on the title, but I'll link to it. It is a wonderful, simple little resource on how God designed marriage to be. So we'll link to those. Rada, do you have anything else you want to share here before we close this out?
Don't ever give up on your marriage.
There you go.
It's worth fighting for.
Yeah.
And even if it's rocky and it's hard, God uses all things to bring good and to bring Him glory. And the Institute of Marriage is vital for our survival.
Yeah. One thing I think we can't forget in that is marriage was never meant to be the design, like our human marriages, that the church is to reflect. Our marriages are to reflect the design that God gave in His relationship with the church.
That's right.
And whenever we're in a hard time, let's remember, how did Jesus love the church? He sacrificed. And was it hard?
Today, when we behave badly as a church, He still loves us and draws us.
Yes, and I think of that first covenant that He made with Abraham. Oh man, this is one of the things that gives me so much hope in all of the Bible. I think it's so cool. Back in the day, whenever you made a covenant, knocked over a bell. whenever you made a covenant, you would take two halves of an animal and you would lay them across one another, and you would walk between the animal, both parties entering into the covenant. And what you were saying was if I break my side of the covenant, let what happened to these animals happen to me. And you're holding yourself to that standard. So this is a life or death scenario. And when God made the covenant with Abraham, saying, I'm going to make you into a great nation, I'm going to bring you into this land, I'm going to do all these things, only one party walked between the animals, and that was God. And what he's communicating in that is he's saying, I know you're going to fail. I know you're going to mess up. But I'm still going to walk between these animals because I won't fail. I won't mess up. And when you do fail, I'm there. Yeah. I'm with you. I got you. I'm going to pick you up. And it's that same God that loved us in that sense, that he died for us. He wants us to have healthy marriages. And he has got our backs. He's going to pick us up, and he wants to see us do well. Yeah. So we have a God who's rooting for us and cheering for us.
That's right.
Yeah, that's good news.
It is.
That's what we need. All right, Rada, anything else?
Don't think so.
All right, don't give up. Stay with it. The Lord will use it in big ways, your marriage, guys. Thank you for listening. If you're on Apple, if you're on Spotify or YouTube, wherever you're at, we ask that you would just leave 5 stars, give a good review, whatever your platform provides that you're listening on. Outside of that, we'll have another episode out soon in which we will kind of detail out. If you're in that hard place where you're wondering, what do I do? That will be for you guys. Otherwise, don't forget to love God
and love people.
And we will see y'all later.